Okay, well, welcome everybody. I'm Stacy with the Iowa City Public Library, where I teach technology classes and also work at the info desk on the second floor. And so the big question is, why do libraries care about fake news? Libraries have always been about information literacy, which is the ability to recognize when information is needed and then locate, evaluate, and effectively use that information. And now that part of our mission extends to media literacy, which is the ability to access and critically evaluate media. And this is a crucial skill set for everyone, from digital natives up. In fact, young people may be especially susceptible to fake news. Let me just share my screen quickly here. Hope you can see that. Let me just adjust it really quick. Oops. No, okay. Hopefully that looks good enough. So young people can be especially susceptible to fake news without a background of having traditional news sources in their lives, such as having a newspaper that they get every day, or TV stations that they follow, or a magazine or two that they trust. Everything online could tend to look the same and carry the same weight. So on the other end, there was a study following the 2016 election that found that Facebook users ages 65 and older shared more than twice as many fake news articles than the next oldest age group, 45 to 65. And they shared 7 times as many fake news articles as the youngest age group, 18 to 29. So wherever your age falls, we can all be tricked. So tonight, we'll talk about ways to evaluate the information you come across in your daily life. So what is fake news? As you can see from this definition, the main thing is that it's false stories that appear to be news. Fake news is not incorrect reporting. So if a journalist has made a genuine mistake without realizing it, that wouldn't be considered fake news. It's just incorrect. There's a difference between misinformation with an M, which is false or inaccurate information, and disinformation with a D, which is deliberately wrong information that's shared to mislead people. Fake news also would not apply to scientific information that changes as we learn more about a topic. So some of the early predictions about how the coronavirus would work in January or so will be different than what we know now following studies and observations, right? And finally, it doesn't make sense to use the term fake news for reporting about oneself that one doesn't like, or one's political party, or damaging reports that might be true. What we're going to talk about is false stories that look like news tonight. Is this a new problem? No. You'll see that the phrase has been tracked back to 1890 when it was used for telegraphs as well as print news. So fabricating news is nothing new, but the internet has made it a lot easier, right? It's hard for me to gather newsprint and ink and a printer to make a reasonable looking newspaper to distribute around town, but it's fairly easy for me to make a website. So why does anyone bother to create fake news? I've got 4 main reasons indicated by these little icons. The first one is to make money. There was an NPR article called "We Tracked Down a Fake News Creator in the Suburbs." This was after the 2016 election. And in the article, they talk to someone who writes fake news and talk about how it can earn people money from ad revenue. Some websites and people who run them could earn $10,000 to $30,000 a month. And that's based on the ads on those websites and the clicking that people do. There are hundreds of different internet ad companies, and Google has the biggest one, that's AdSense, but it doesn't really fix anything now that Google changed their policy that they don't allow their ads on, quote, misrepresentative content. Even if Google won't show your fake news, some other ad company might put ads on your website. So it's a big problem, and it's not likely to go away very easily. The people who are writing the fake news might create it from scratch or borrow content or headlines from existing stories. And money is also the motivation for misleading headlines, if you've ever encountered something like that, where it's got a very dramatic headline and then the actual article doesn't support it. Another term for that is clickbait. And also, sometimes if you look on a website, there will be an ad that's carefully designed to look like the same style as the rest of the website, but it's really an ad trying to get you to click on it. So money's the motivating factor for those types of fake news. The second reason someone might create fake news is for manipulation. Fake news functions as propaganda for a political cause, which is what we need to be watching out for in the next few months. Another reason that fake news writers have given is that they do it to make a point, maybe to expose people's media illiteracy, or to show how absurd a group's views become if you take them a bit farther. I read a couple of interviews with fake media or fake news writers, and they both made this point, but they had a hard time defending it for very long. But nonetheless, it's interesting to hear that some find it to be noble work. Third reason is humor. So sometimes it does take a minute to realize that something that you found online is intended as satire or parody. Satire is a literary work holding up human vices and follies to ridicule. Parodies are humorous or mocking imitations of something using the same form as the original. So when The Onion has a goofy headline that looks like a news article using that same formatting, that's a parody. And the sarcasm that's involved in satire and parody is infamously hard to detect online. So sometimes it can be tricky to realize that you're reading a joke. Some of the humor websites that get mistaken for real news are The Onion, the Borowitz Report, McSweeney's, and there are others. Does anyone want to chime in any other website that they've been tricked by? It's not essential. All right, well, the fourth reason someone might create fake news is a simple misunderstanding. So individuals making a mistake about how they understand something is now easily and quickly shared on the internet. And I have an example here. There's a line through this, I'm just gonna pause to say, because I made this slideshow in Google Docs, and each time that I tried to paste in this picture of this tweet, a minute later, it was just replaced by a blank square with an exclamation mark. So I think that their algorithm or their computer systems picked up that this was fake news, or it had been flagged as fake news, and they were preventing me from sharing it, which was very interesting. So that's why I put that line through it, to try to trick them. But basically, this is an example from 2016. There was an interview with the man who wrote this tweet in the New York Times, where they say, Mr. Tucker, who had taken photos of a large group of buses he saw near downtown Austin earlier in the day because he thought it was unusual, then saw reports of protests against Mr. Trump, who was newly elected in his city, and he decided the two were connected. So he made this tweet using the photos he had taken, and someone, presumably who followed this Trump 2016 hashtag maybe, shared it to a Reddit group about Trump. It was shared from there to another discussion forum. From there, it was shared to various Facebook pages or groups, and it was shared thousands of times by individual Facebook users. And eventually, even the president tweeted on this topic. And Mr. Tucker, who was responsible for the tweet, explained himself that he just made a misunderstanding, and he drew a connection that seemed reasonable. Also said, quote, "I'm also a very busy businessman, and I don't have time to fact check everything that I put out there, especially when I don't think that it's going out there for wide consumption." So there's some food for thought. Do you ever share your conjectures online? Do you ever expect that more than a dozen or so people will comment on it? And can you see how easily something that's fairly innocent could turn into something big online? So the big question, why do we fall for this? I mentioned earlier that young people and older people may have a hard time interpreting online sources, but we are all vulnerable to the lure of confirmation bias, regardless of age. According to Psychology Today, that's, quote, "When people would like a certain idea or concept to be true, they end up believing it to be true, and they are motivated by wishful thinking. And this error leads the individual to stop gathering information when the evidence gathered so far confirms the views or prejudices one would like to be true. Once we have formed a view, we embrace information that confirms that view while ignoring or rejecting information that casts doubt on it." And it's through a process like this that our social media feeds become designed to confirm our opinions. This is hard to avoid. It's just something to keep in mind and try to periodically view your social media with a bird's eye view and make sure that you're taking in information that's representative of the world. Another reason that we fall for shocking headlines is our values and moral outrage. So humans have largely emotional reactions, and then we employ reason later to justify them. And there's interesting information about that from the writer of The Righteous Mind, which is Jonathan Haidt. I don't know how to pronounce his name, but you could follow up on that if you find that interesting. And I will admit that this week I shared the Little Villages article about how Iowa was misreporting COVID-19 numbers before confirming it in any way. I read the article, I put it on Facebook, and then a few minutes later, when people had heated comments on my post, it occurred to me that I should search on Google for Iowa COVID error. And then I did find that multiple other places had shared the same info, including the Des Moines Register, which is a source that I respect. But it's very easy, even if you are like had spent most of the day preparing for class on fake news, to just get caught up in something dramatic. So don't blame yourself if that happens. And finally, you may not think you have much of a bias, but we all do in some ways. And you can find media bias charts like this online if you'd like to see where your favorite sources fall on the spectrum. Or if you are investigating something that you saw online, you could try to look for a chart like this for an unfamiliar source to see where it falls. Why is this an important skill for us? I really liked how one BBC article put it, that we have a responsibility to, quote, "practice information hygiene" to help stop the spread of viral misinformation. So if you're not sure that something is true or not, don't share it just in case it could be helpful or just in case you would warn someone of a problem. you might do more harm than good that way. And that's especially true for medical claims. About 20% of Americans get news often from social media, and you just don't want to be part of something bad spreading. And of course, nobody wants the embarrassment of being called out publicly or kind of having it on your permanent record of Facebook that you shared something that turned out to be wrong. You want to be savvy, and I will show you how. So let's say you're online and you just saw something surprising or shocking or appalling or amazing. Maybe a politician was accused of something horrendous. Maybe someone has shared a miracle cure for the coronavirus, or shared some amazing news like this, which I've just made up. Maybe imagine a headline that says, the US government is not charging income taxes for all of 2020. That's not true, but that would really get your attention, right? If something ignites a big emotional reaction in you, the big thing is to pause. Take a breath, turn off your knee-jerk reaction, and then work through these 6 steps. The first one is to check the URL. This is the web address or link, or it stands for Uniform Resource Locator. You can see in this example of a URL that I'm talking about the domain suffix here, and that's the .org part. It's not necessarily at the end of the whole address if the web page is a few things in, but it's the end before that second slash or the first single slash. It tells you something about the source. So .com are commercial websites, generally selling something or a business, or someone has paid
Finally found it.
to use them. Oh, I'm sorry. Did someone just ask a question?
Yeah.
Nope, okay. .org, originally these were totally limited to nonprofit organizations. Now it's a little squishier. So not every .org is necessarily a nonprofit. And even then, content produced on a website like this could have an advocacy slant or a fundraising slant. So there could be a bias in a .org website. So you'd want to still think about that. .edu are educational institutions. So you might think, oh, well, this would be scholarly information that I could trust from a professor or something. But you should realize that students are sometimes given assignments to create websites or share their papers online. So it could be a student's work that you've encountered. You would want to dig farther into that too. .gov websites are produced by the US government, as are .mil for military sites. So in general, that should be trustworthy. And .net could be anything, just like .com can kind of be anything. Another thing to look out for is country suffixes. So if you are looking at a website and there's a 2-letter N at the end of the first part of the URL, you could look up what country that is if it's not familiar to you. But I know that, Russia was a big deal in 2016, and I myself have seen things people have posted that had a .ru suffix to them, and that should just be a little red flag. Are there any questions about the URL before I move on? Very good. Next thing to check is the date. If you are reading an article and the topic is really shocking, but then you see that the article was from a few months ago or even a few years ago, and you didn't hear this news until just now, that's a bad sign. This was not a real news story. So it's just a good idea to eliminate the date uncertainty first. And then you can move on to actually reading the article. So a few years back, There was a study by computer scientists at Columbia University and the French National Institute that found that 59% of the links shared on social media have never actually been clicked. People are willing to retweet and share articles based solely on the headline. And this is such a phenomenon that there was a joke article someone posted with the title of "Study Shows 70% of Facebook users only read the headline of science stories before commenting." And it was an empty article, it just had gibberish for the text, but that article was shared 46,000 times and by a lot of people who did not get the joke. So, so this is a big problem, and if you can read the article, you're way ahead of everybody else. As you're reading it, you might find that it's badly written. It might have weird errors that tell you something's wrong. You might find that the content doesn't support the headline after all, or it never gets to that point exactly. But if you're out on the internet and it really seems sketchy and you're hesitant to click the link because it could, remember in the olden days where clicking on a bad link could give you a virus or something, if you feel weird about the link, you don't have to click it. You can always search that title in the source in a new tab or just in Google or whatever. The next thing to look for is the source. Where was this published? So if you already thought about the URL and the domain, that tells you something about it. But if you can't even find the website yet, you might have to do a little work to track it back to a website or a social media post that a random person wrote. Once you have opened the link or found the website, you can look for clues about their professionalism in the way that the website is laid out, if it includes a substantial footer at the bottom with information about that organization, if there are spelling or grammar errors, that should be a bad sign. And finally, if you can find an About Us page on the website, it's good to look for. It'll say something maybe about the purpose of that organization, if it's affiliated with certain causes or things like that. But you do want to take an About page with a grain of salt, because an organization or a person can write anything they like about themselves there. So you may also want to do a separate web search for the organization or the name of the website to learn what others are saying about it. If it's obviously a malicious website, someone will have said something about it, and you'll be able to make that determination. Next step is the author. If this article is the product of real journalism, the author will want credit for it. And you'll be able to find their name at the top of the web page or at the side, and they'll get their credit. If a Twitter account has a blue check mark next to it, that means it's verified, and that can be a helpful sign. But if it's hard to find an author's name on a website, or if there isn't much information about their social media account, or if you came across a quote or a statement that's not attributed to anyone, that is a red flag. But at that point, you can move on to the next and last step of confirming the story somewhere else. You can do a Google search for the key terms to see if the story has been published in other media outlets, and look for a source that you recognize or trust. But when you do that search, don't assume that Google ranks their results by reliability. You still need to use your information literacy skills to scan down that list of results. I always look for the domain suffixes as I go until I find something that I think is reliable. Also, when you're looking in those search results, date is another thing that shows up that can be part of that initial scan. And there was some study that I didn't write down, but it said that a very small percentage of people go beyond the first 10 results on a Google search. So take the time to at least look through that first page of results before, before trying one of them or reaching a conclusion about something. If the story that you're reading mentions a new report that's out or a study, you can search for that study using a keyword from it or the name of the organization that's mentioned. It's much better to get your information straight from the source rather than filtered through some random person's opinion. And if you think about playing the game of telephone as a kid, it's very easy for someone to get something slightly wrong, and then the next person to get something slightly wronger about it. And there's no reason for you to be at the end of the telephone line. You can just start fresh and go to the source. Finally, if someone is quoted, you can, but you're not sure about the website that you found it on, you can search for that quote or their name, put the quote in quotation marks in your search so that you don't have to filter through a lot of similar results. And if it is a legitimate quote, you should be able to track it back to an event or an official statement or a news report or something. If you can't find like an official place where it was first mentioned, it might not be accurate. As far as confirming the story elsewhere goes, I want you to see how Facebook recently integrated a fact-checking website into my own feed. So when this story came up about the change to the Washington football team's name, a person that I know on Facebook shared this post, and built into it right below, Facebook integrated this related articles thing where they pulled from PolitiFact that this was checked to be mostly true. This is, I'm sure, an effort that Facebook is making because obviously they've come under great criticism about allowing anything to be posted without any checks on it, right? So this is an interesting effort that they made. I also went separately to Snopes.com, which is another fact-checking website or a place that debunks hoaxes or whatever. And I searched like Washington Redskins or something and looked at their article on that topic. And it was it was kind of a long page going through the nuances of this story, explaining more background about it. They had some original sources from the local newspaper at the time. And so they fleshed out that, yes, this man who's mentioned shared photos from his tribe to use as inspiration for the logo, but that he himself was not a graphic designer and did not draw the picture. So they also concluded that this was a mostly true story. But it's worth stopping to think about how things are not always black and white, right? This was a kind of a gray story. And so you'll probably find that that's also true of a lot of other stories that you encounter online. It may have some truth that's exaggerated or something complicated about it. Another fact-checking website other than PolitiFact and Snopes is FactCheckorg. I looked at that today, and it is jam-packed with presidential election fact-checking for both sides, from all sides right now, looking at what people have said in campaigns and about the campaigns. So you might find that interesting if you are closely following the news. I'd like to show you another example from my own Facebook feed. Are there any questions about this part so far or about fact checking?
So when you listen to the politicians on TV, then how you then take pet phrases or what and plug it into fact check every time to see what's accurate?
Well, yeah, people are doing that for a living. So you wouldn't have to do a lot of the work. If you could wait at least an hour or so after a politician has spoken on TV and remember a keyword or two and just do a Google or just an online search for the name of the politician and that keyword. I almost always have great success finding that someone has already written a quick article, looking up the truth of that fact or not, or that statement, and giving some more background about it. You could go straight to these fact-checking websites as well if it was big enough to warrant one of their articles. Yeah, trying to do it in real time while someone is giving a speech or during a debate might really be taxing, but you're welcome to try for sure. Any other questions or comments?
Hi, this is Mary. Can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead, Mary.
Um, I wanted to ask you about a website that I use that's called MediaBiasFactCheck.com. And it talks about how basically it breaks down the different sources like newspapers and I think it's broadcasting, it's all kind of media. And it breaks them down into how, whether they're left bias or right bias and how far and how extreme they are. It has like a graduation, a grading scale. And then it also checks the validity of that organization, how often, how reliable they are, are the bulk of their articles actually true, or do they just kind of grab things and spit it out? Like, like Breitbart or Democracy Now! And stuff, they'd be, if you look them up, they'd be on different ends of the scale and stuff.
Yeah.
So I would like from you, if you could look into that, the MediaBiasFactCheck.org or .com, and because you're a research person, I assume.
Yeah, absolutely. So
if you could look into their methodology that they use in order to determine. I've looked up places that I know, like Cedar Rapids Gazette, the Des Moines Register, just things that public television, stuff like that. And it seems to go in line with what I've experienced from them.
Okay.
So it seems like they're pretty legitimate.
So
I want to know from somebody that does research, it's part of your job, that, if you could confirm with me that that's something that I could use.
yeah, so I think what I would want to do is spend some time looking at that website.
Yeah.
I also did
be able to do it now, but and I know that it'll take you a while.
Well, I did just do some searching while you were talking, and I found two places where people were talking about that website, and one of them says it cites a person saying that it's a deceptive site because they do use facts, just not all the facts, in order to mask their bias. So there's some question out there.
Well, and I know that there's people that don't like how they're being rated, and so they make comments and they, you spew out stuff.
Absolutely.
In response to that.
So yeah, you're right to be critically thinking about whether to trust that site, even though they're talking about all the right things. They might still have some kind of a bias, or they might be incomplete. It is hard to know for sure about anything. This goes back to the black and white and gray, right? That sort of thinking critically is not going to be something that you do and then you're done. You're probably going to have to think critically and carefully forever because everything's subject to flux and change and movement like that. So I will look into that website, and I'd be glad to get back to you.
Email, right?
With some analysis. Yeah, sure.
Okay, that'd be great.
Does anybody have a website similar to that that they think is useful for others to know about? One we haven't mentioned yet? Okay, if you think of something later, feel free to share it as we go along. I have another example I'd like to show you. This one is about photos, which is a little bit different. So this was on my own Facebook feed yesterday. So during the storm last week, I was indoors the whole time and I didn't get to see what the sky looked like. So when I saw this post, I was very interested. But what made me hesitant about this? A few things. One, these pictures are so dramatic that I asked myself, is this too good to be true? That's a good question to ask yourself in general online. Second, the image quality varies. The one at the top right is pretty grainy and almost looks like it could have been taken a decade or more ago when camera technology was different. So that stopped me for a second. And then the bottom right photo has some text on it. It has this 2 out of 6 up here and the words "the storm" on it. And the other photos don't have any text on them. So that made me want to pursue that one. So I decided to do a reverse image search for this picture at the bottom right. If you're on a website and you can do a right click on a picture, you can usually copy the image location that copies the URL or web address. Or you can also save the picture to your desktop or take a screenshot of it. And if you go to the Google image search, this little camera icon is the way to do a reverse search. And you can either paste in that web address or upload a photo. So when I did that search, there was really only one result, and it was from a GoFundMe fundraiser. That was, I blocked out their name here, but it was not the name of my acquaintance who shared the post, nor the name of the original person who made the Facebook post. It's a third name. And so I followed up by opening that GoFundMe website. And there were a couple of things that stood out to me. One, that the person was from Davenport. And as I read the text where she was requesting funding, she said that she woke up in her home in Davenport as the storm had hit and, experienced the hardship of the storm. And so if this picture was supposed to be taken in Marshalltown, which would have had the storm hit much earlier, that didn't make sense for me. And also, this version of the picture has some more text visible, and it looked like it said "conquer the storm." So I went ahead in a different web search and I searched for that phrase just out of curiosity. And it brought up a website called Conquer the Storm. And what do you know? There is that photo on their homepage. A couple of things that jumped out at my eye when I looked at this homepage. First of all, it's a .com, right? There's some grammar, there's no apostrophe here, some grammar issues on it. So that right away makes me just a little bit careful about this website. I went ahead and clicked on the weather news, thinking Maybe this really was a picture that was taken last week and they put it on their website. But when I looked on there, the latest post they had was August 2nd, a week before the storm that we just had. So that led me to conclude that this was probably not a picture of our derecho. So I went back to the original post and looked through that man's comments. And after a couple that were like, wow, these are amazing pictures, holy moly. Here's someone who pushes back. He says, these are all fake, good grief. I work for the National Weather Service. I was on this when it entered Marshalltown. The one pic you posted was of a mesocyclone supercell in Milwaukee. Come on, dude, it wasn't even the right color. And the person replies, sorry, man, I just took the person at their word. So let's work through that part, right? You'll have to decide for yourself if a friend or acquaintance of yours or relative, as often happens, posts something that is incorrect or misinterprets something that they're sharing. Is that your responsibility or is it not? It really depends on your personality and your relationship with that person. If you do push back on their post, think about how to do so compassionately and usefully. Maybe you'll send a private message as opposed to writing in the comments. Maybe you'll gently help them understand that a post was satire and a joke. Maybe if something is offensive, you might suggest that they remove the post because not everybody thinks about that capability that they have with their feed, that they can go back and make edits or delete things that they have posted. But just remember that people get defensive when they feel attacked. So use some strategy as you think about how to get your point across. This guy is a little bit brusque, but he's not actually rude. And so he got sort of an okay response out of that original poster. But you can imagine that that could have gone very badly and people could have been defensive and stopped being friends as a result. So in general, you can't control what others post online, but you can control what you believe that you read and what you share. So there are a handful of website evaluation methods out there where people have condensed this kind of information into acronyms. You might want to pursue one of these for your own use. You could look into that. But remember, whether you use one of these acronyms or what I shared, you have to go through all the steps for each article or each story that you're questioning. If you only look at the author or the date, that may not be enough to figure out if something is reliable. So here's my quick recap of the things that you'll want to check. Look at that URL to see if it is from a different country or seems sketchy. If it's something like amazing news, you won't believe it.com, that's very different than something that seems more like a real newspaper or other similar source. You'll want to check the date so that you're not sharing old news. I know that I have done that at least once in my life. And so I learned that lesson. Just get that basic foundation of when this came out. Actually read the article. This is just a good practice. If it doesn't express in the article what the headline says, there's a good chance that you'll feel bad about that later on. Think about where it was published in the source. Is this a source that has a bias? Is this even real news or is it someone's fake news? Thinking about who wrote it. Does this person have any training or authority to make these claims? Can you even find the person's name that they admit that they wrote it? And then finally, confirming it elsewhere. That takes a lot of different forms, but there's no reason that you're limited to looking at just what that article presents to you. You can step to the side and do fresh searches for the author, the website, the content that you're finding, any quotes that are mentioned or studies. You can do all of that separately and you don't have to rely on any one source. So it is my hope that you will apply these skills to the news that you find about the coronavirus, the upcoming elections, general news stories going forward, medical information, and everything else. And if we were doing this class in person, I would have had you do some exercises during the class and look at some real examples and click around on some websites. Since that's not possible, I hope that you will try this out the next time that you look online. And so let's just imagine, where will you use these skills? Obviously, Facebook, Twitter, the Nextdoor app. I don't know how many of you use that, but it really is just like talking to your neighbors on the sidewalk, and not a lot of people are fact checking on my Nextdoor anyway. So anywhere you spend time online, you want to use these skills, as well as anytime you're looking at the results of an online search that you've done. And so just imagine yourself pausing to think critically while using your phone or tablet or desktop computer, doing this out in public and at work and at home. Because when information is accessible everywhere, that's where you'll need to use your information literacy skills. So, are there any questions? Does anyone have a tip to share that I didn't cover, or a story to tell of something they wish had gone differently, or a time that they successfully put someone on the right path maybe? Oh, I see in the chat, thank you, Babylon Bee. That is another example of a parody or a humor website. Good one.
I have a question. This is Mary again.
Yeah.
What's your current opinion of Wikipedia?
Of Wikipedia? Yeah, that's complicated, right? So we know that the whole nature of Wikipedia is that anyone can contribute, and anyone can, from one second to the next, change something that's written, and then someone else has to come back and fix it back if that first person was incorrect or had bad intentions. But it does sort of seem like a community has built up around Wikipedia of people who really care about it. And it's my understanding that if someone has made an edit on a page, that they'll get notified when changes are made. And so I think people are very protective of the pages that they care about, and they won't allow obviously wrong information to live on there for very long. So I do use Wikipedia as a source, but I'm careful about it. I use it as a gauge of public knowledge. So when I looked up your mediabiasfactcheck.com, Wikipedia, I just looked at the synopsis and it had the word that it was amateurish, which I didn't want to say to make you feel bad. But that just tells me something. That's like hearing from a buddy that they had a certain opinion of it. So I'll take that information in, but I won't rely on it completely to make my decisions. Did you have an example, Mary, of something that you might check Wikipedia for?
Well, I've just heard different things. I know some people won't use it at all. And then I know that I've seen where they say that the percentage rate of error on Wikipedia is not that different from the encyclopedia.
Okay.
So,
yeah, it really depends. There are some things where Wikipedia might be the easiest way to get an overview of a topic, and there are a lot of other topics where starting somewhere else would just be easier and more reliable. So if you had a medical question, you just would prefer to start at a medical website that you trust rather than looking on Wikipedia, right?
Yeah.
If you had a local question that was timely, I wouldn't look on Wikipedia necessarily for derecho information. I would find different local sources for that. But if I wanted to know, what was the general gist of the Spanish flu of 1918, and it didn't really the accuracy of that really didn't matter for me. I just wanted a vague sense of it. I might just skim through Wikipedia for that.
Or back up Wikipedia with another source.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a good question. What other questions are there? Do you see yourself already using some of these techniques, or are some of them new to you?
I'm still reacting to the politicians on TV, and you're saying type in their name and a key phrase.
So, right, so let's just make something up. Let's say that Joni Ernst made a claim about how many people had died of the coronavirus in Iowa, and it was not at all what you thought it was. Maybe she said only 50 people had died, and the news today was that it's 1,000. So I might do a Google search for Ernst, coronavirus, and the number 50, if I knew for sure that that was the number, and then see what kind of articles I get. If she just said it, and I'm watching her live speech, no one will probably have written about it yet. So if I don't see an article right away, I would give it some time. I would give it an hour or give it till tomorrow to look up the analysis. But the analysis comes so fast nowadays, right? You don't have to wait long. And in general, you'll find someone who not only fact checks it, but also gives you the background of maybe why they got it wrong or some more nuances. So there's always more to read about these issues if you're interested enough.
I really appreciate some of the sites to go to for fact checking, because often when I see something like that, like I said, I just kind of go, really? And yeah, I try not to respond too quickly, because I've done that before, just on even family members, and that's not a good idea. So I often type comments and then just delete them, because that at least gets it out of my system. But
It's a good emotional procedure to go through. Yeah.
yeah, but no, so I really appreciate some actual places that are reliable places to check those facts, especially like the images too, because yeah, you're seeing so many fantastic images anymore about on any number of things. And
yeah. And some of them, maybe for political purposes or something like that, some of them, there was one that I saw as I was preparing for this, where there was a photo of daisies that had mutated and sort of were doubled up. And someone had shared that on Tumblr or Reddit or somewhere online and said that that was the result of the Hiroshima atomic bomb, and that people just accepted that. Why would someone make that up? And until someone with science background said, no, this is an ordinary mutation that's commonly found in daisies. And so sometimes it's just, sometimes it's just someone making a guess at things. And it can take the form of images, it can take the form of text. You probably have heard of the deep fake videos. Does anyone remember this? Where people are able to use video editing technology to use existing footage of someone and make it look like they're saying something else. So this happened to Obama, and I'm sure it's happened to other political figures. So you want to apply the same critical thinking even to videos that you might see. If something seems off about it, if the shadows seem wrong, or something about the pixels around their mouth seem wrong, then you can do a search and you can type in Obama and some phrase that he said in that video and see if someone has already pointed out that it's fake. If it's not fake, then you would probably find an article reporting that speech, the text of that speech, and you could confirm that it was real.
I think you brought up an important point, and I don't know, you didn't really hammer it home that much, but I think if you're doing Google searches and you put quotation marks around what you're searching, it will only find that exact string. It does a string match. So if you want to look up a quotation, I thought that was interesting the way you talked about that, because I never thought of it that way. But like you probably all know, when you do Google searches, you find millions and millions of stuff because it's finding stuff that's kind of like what you entered in. So when you really want to get a definitive, I only want to see this search, put quotation marks around whatever you type in.
Yeah, if you're able to pick out the actual quote, and there's no questions about how if someone would have written it as a contraction or not, if it was don't or do not, or if there's no questions about what exactly the text was, throw it in quotes just to see. If the quotes bring up no results, then take them out and move along. But you're right, that's a powerful method. Oh, I see a chat from Corey. These apply to memes as well. Absolutely. So does everybody know what a meme is if you were not at my Memes 101 class that last month or earlier this month? So these are those pictures that you find online. It may be something from pop culture, or it may be a photo of any kind, and then people have put text on the picture, and it's often says something funny or something dramatic. Not a good source of news, a meme. So it's usually used for entertainment purposes or satire or parody, driving a point home. So if you see something in a meme that makes an outrageous claim about something, could be a claim about the coronavirus, about our storm and the devastation in Iowa, about a politician, just do a fresh search on that topic and the claim and see if you can find it anywhere else. Anybody can use a free website to make their own meme, take a picture online, put their text on it. There's nothing magical about where those come from. Okay, yes. Critical thinking, not just reacting. And it gets easy, like you spend a lot of time online, you get really wrapped up in just reaction, reaction, reaction as you scroll down, right? So taking the time to pause is an important thing to remember. Any last questions or tips to each other? Any stories to share? Okay, well, I gave you skills to do this yourself, but of course, if something ever comes up where you would like a librarian's assistance in doing your fact checking or looking into something that you heard about, we are very happy to do that with you. So feel free to contact the library with any kind of question like this, and we'll be glad to help. Any last remarks before we go? Thank you for joining me on a lovely summer evening. Okay, well, have a good night. Let us know if you have any follow-up questions.